Hey everybody, welcome back to Electric Cafe. This video is a review of the last 2.5 weeks of videos that I've done related to electronic music. Um, just for fun, I put them in order from lowest rated to highest rated, but they're not necessarily related to each other, and I don't like to compare different genres. So take it with a grain of salt on the ranking of these songs and the score because if you go to my playlist, you can. It's easier to compare those songs to each other because they're in the genres. So you'll see new wave in there. There'll be an EBM playlist. There'll be a rock playlist in there, and you compare those to each other. That's fine. That's how I'm trying to do it. So don't take these reviews, comparing to each other and say, oh, how can that album be better than a Peter Gabriel album? And so it's just different genres, and I do use the same rating system with it, but I do compare the albums also in the playlist that they're in as well. So to help me, kind of give my checks and balances with to make sure that how I score something is kind of on the right track, or at least I feel like a certain album is better, so I can kind of adjust the score and compare it with where I'm feeling the album is. And so looking at the top, there was 21 albums I rated in the last 3 weeks, and I just want to give a quick overview and review the score with you. So the 21st lowest rated album was Shakespeare Sisters' debut album from 1989 called Sacred Heart. It was kind of a mixed bag, maybe a misdirection of how to use her voice and maybe what direction they're sort of using the songs and, what their audience is. Is their audience dance songs? Is their audience alternative music? Does her voice work better with pop music? Or, there's just all kinds of different styles of music on there. And so it's not the most well balanced album. There's a couple good songs on there, but I think for the most part it's kind of under par and not very good. Although I did appreciate listening to her. I think she has a good voice. I think there's some opportunity in there. Looking forward to reviewing the second album, which has Stay on it and stuff like that. Maybe that one will be a little bit better. But I give it a 45 out of 100, kind of a below par album, slash not very good. And number 20, I rated Anne One's debut album from 1991 called Anguish. I rated it a 54. Thought it was an okay album. It's an okay mix of EBM and synth pop music. I think it's a decent debut album. It does kind of mirror some other bands around in that genre for the time. I'm hoping they get better through their career. I've heard an album after that in the 2000s called Body Pop that I know I like that album better. So I'm looking forward to reviewing more of their catalog, and I thought I'd start out with their debut. But I didn't think the album was dated or anything like that. There could have been there's a couple dated sounds on there, but I think for the most part it ties in well with what was going on in late 80s and early 90s with EBM music and stuff like that. So I think it's on par with there, but just the songs aren't really developed and there's nothing that really sticks out. And I think the instrumentals on the album are actually better than some of the songs. So I gave it a 54 out of 100. I think it's an okay album. Then I rated Peter Gabriel's album, his second album called Scratch. I gave this album a 55 out of 100. I think it's an okay album. I couldn't say it's a pretty good album, and pretty good starts at 56 on my rating. Of course, 60 starts good. I think it has a couple of good songs. I think it's probably the weakest Peter Gabriel solo album. There are a few good songs on here. I certainly like A Wonderful Day, Mother of Violence. I like Flotsam and Jetsam, Wonderful Day in a One-Way World. On the Air isn't bad too, but for the most part, it's got some probably some of the maybe it evolves the least of any Peter Gabriel album, and is sort of him trying to make some hits. Maybe I don't think there's enough experimentation on here. The ballads aren't. The ballad on here, "Mother of Violence," is actually my favorite song, but it doesn't compare to ballads of other albums like, like when After the Flood, and you know Don't Give Up, of course, and Mercy Rain, and all those things. Like, it doesn't compare to those highlights. So I give it a 55. I think it's an okay album. It's not a bad album to listen through. It just doesn't really stand out that much. And again, it's probably my least favorite Peter Gabriel album. Next, you have Group 87's second album, called A Career in Data Processing. I gave this a 58 out of 100. I think it's a pretty good album. It balances some sort of, synth pop with a little bit of new age. And it's got a couple really strong keyboard players on here, and composers, producers, Mark Isham and what's his name? Patrick O'Hearn, and also Peter Mauna, I believe Manu is the third guy. I don't know too much about him, but I think it's got some good songs on here. It's got some good new wave songs in here. Got a little bit of maybe a touch of new romantic on here. Just kind of some minimalism on here, some interesting electronics. Nothing that really stands out. I don't think I rated anything higher than 3.5 stars, any particular one song, but I think it's a pretty solid album overall, and I give it a 58 out of 100. Next is The Sisterhood, the 1986 album, The Gift. I gave it a 59 out of 100. Of course, The Sisterhood is a side project of Sisters of Mercy. They did one album, and it's an interesting album for a few reasons. A, there's only 5 songs on it. B, they sort of wrote the song in a hurry, trying to take the name from the members that left and eventually formed Mission UK, and of course The Mission. And it's kind of a mixed bag, because I couldn't really rate it a good record, because I do like the songs, and it's during a great period of the band. It's right in between, right before Floodland, after First, Last, and Always. So it's done at a great time in their career, and it sounds a lot like B-sides of Floodland, and they're similar in that vein, and so you do want to like them, but there's really not much in content there as far as words. I think a couple of them were instrumentals, if I'm not mistaken. A couple of them don't really have much words at all. They're good sounding. They're kind of long. Most of them are like 7-8 minute tracks trying to fill up an album. It almost sounds like an EP. So it's a conflicting album, because I like Sisters of Mercy so much. I want to like it because it's like B-sides of a great period of Sisters of Mercy. But when you kind of look at it with a critical eye, they're too long. They don't really do too much. There's no lyrics. They're not songs per se. They're kind of just rhythms and some sounds on it. And I do like them. It's just hard to say it's a good album when there's only 5 tracks on here, and they're all like 7-8 minutes long. It's a difficult album to rate, though, and I actually wanted to rate it higher, but when I started to really kind of settle on it, I was just like, there's only 5 songs on here, and some of them don't have words, and some of them don't have choruses, and some of them are just trying to. And then you think of the overall idea of the album, and then just rushing it and trying to take the name of the band. It doesn't really give it a good. It doesn't really support any kind of atmosphere that you want to give it differently. Besides, it's rushed into production and released and not very fine-tuned or really exposed, and then you really start thinking it's just some average B-side songs on there, and you're kind of like, well, I can't give it too high of a score. So, but 59 over 100, 59 by 100, 59 out of 100. Who's that? But it's a pretty good album. I think it is kind of cool to hear additional songs, because I'd never heard this album. Even though I'm a big Sisters of Mercy fan, I just never kind of got around to it. And it's probably because people don't recommend it very much. You don't hear Sisters of Mercy fans saying you got to hear the Sisterhood album. You know, it's kind of more on the dance side than really on the goth rock side or goth electronic side. So I can see why people don't really recommend it, because it's kind of more Dr. Avalanche featuring Sisters of Mercy. But yeah, 59 out of 100. Then Information Society, their debut album, self-titled. I think it's a good album, but it's on the low side. I gave it a 60 out of 100. There's a few good songs on there. Of course, Walking Away, which I have the single here. You know, 45, and you know, it's got a few other good songs as well. Of course, Running is a great song. Pure Energy is a great song as well. There's a couple other songs I like, but you know, it's not a very complete album, and there's some real unfortunate tracks on there, in my opinion. I can't remember. I think it was the B-side to Walking Away. That's also on the album. That one's a really poor track. I'm trying to remember the name. Make It Funkier. That album's not good. It's almost like, besides a couple ballads that they've done, like since Information Society, Running, Walking Away, and Pure Energy are all kind of the same beat for the most part, right? If they try to make any other beat that's not slow, it sounds really bad. And Make It Funkier is a great example. The album's a little short on content. I think it's around 9 songs, and one of them is like a minute long, which I think is the Make It Funkier one. And then there's kind of a so-so cover of Lay All Your Love on Me by ABBA in there. It's not a bad album. It's just, I feel like I'm defending it for giving such a low score, because I know there's people out there that really, really like this album. But you know, when you think of the differences of tracks and the overall depth and the variety of songs on there, it's just not there. But I still think it's a good album. It's just on the low side, 60 out of 100. And then in 15th place for the last 3 weeks is Manufacturer's debut album called TerrorVision, or is it their second album? I'm blanking on which album it is. This is the single. I think it's their debut album called TerrorVision. I gave it a 61 out of 100. I think it's a good album. It's very of the time of late 80s kind of EBM and industrial music. It sounds very much like other music on Network Records. I think it's a good album. I think it's kind of a time capsule. I don't know if it's aged great, but it's aged as well as Frontline Assembly or most of industrial at that time, and I think it's a pretty well balanced album, you know. And even though it's a little short on content, I think it's on the low side of a good album, and I gave it a 61 out of 100. Next up, number 14 was the Colorbox debut album called Colorbox. This is the single for the first album, but I just wanted to show Colorbox in case in case Colorbox didn't ring a bell. Maybe the 4AD cover would ring a bell. It's the only release I have is this Colorbox, because of the amazing B-side Tarantula. I give Colorbox album a 62 out of 100. It's kind of it's an album that is successful in merging a lot of different genres, but just not to the level that I can say it's a very good album. Like there's some challenging parts with the production. There's some challenging parts with the recording and the engineering on there, mixing. It's kind of raw sounding. It could be, all those things could be a little bit better. But as far as like the actual songs, they're close to very good. All the other things kind of bring it down just a little bit, but it's close to being very good in some ways in the songs. And because there's a nice variety and there's a lot of interesting and challenging things going on in it. But I think the most important thing about Colorbox is the combination of styles that they do. Like, not only just variation of the music that they do, but the styles of what they what they've combined and done songs under. There's reggae in there. There's sort of a ska sound. There's electronic in there. There's a saxophone in there. There's jazz in there. There's sort of a hip hop in there. There's EBM. It seems like there's nothing that they couldn't do, and I'll mix it on one album. And for that reason, it sounds a little junky, but in some ways, it sounds pretty unique. And I think if you go into it with an open mind, you'll be pleasantly surprised about the album. But you'll kind of definitely think that the album could be recorded better and could have been mixed and engineered better. It's kind of a very raw album. Probably if there was any album on here that was the rawest and probably needed to be redone again, it could have been this Color Box album. But I gave it 62 out of 100. Savage, I gave it a 63 out of 100. Kind of a Italo disco album. It's kind of a little short on content, but it's got some really good tracks, some really good catchy songs. There's not too many Italo disco artists that have done a full album and it'd be really excellent all the way through, or even very good all the way through. You kind of get what you get with that with Italo disco. You'll hear a few good songs you like from an artist, but then you'll hear some ones that aren't so good. It was such a short period of time in music, maybe 82 to maybe it went to 86, 87. It sort of changed in the Italo house, but it's kind of a short period of genre time where it didn't evolve that much, and so a lot of the songs on there, they don't really evolve that much. They're kind of generally what you usually get is a producer making albums worth of work, and it all kind of sound very familiar. This isn't that much difference. A lot of it does sound familiar, but this, I think the choruses, the melodies, lifted a little bit higher than most, and there's a good amount of good songs on there as well. It's a fairly consistent album, although it is a little short on content. I think it was 7 or 8 tracks, but it's got some highlights on there too as well. So it's got some upper tier, almost verging on classics. And I gave it a 63 out of 100. One album that I didn't do a review on because I don't really have too much to say about it, and I think I didn't really connect with it. And I thought I'd give it a try because I've heard their names a lot over the last few years. I only have one album by there, and it wasn't this album that I reviewed. It was A Certain Ratio, The Graveyard and the Ballroom. I gave it a 63 out of 100. I think it's a good album. And most of it was interesting because it's really not my style of music. There wasn't a lot of catchiness in it. There wasn't a lot of melodies. There isn't cool beats and things like that. It's not too much electronic. It's more on the sort of, I don't know, maybe what do you call it? Some people call it left field. So it's sort of like left field and funk and maybe a little bit of dance in there, but sort of a post punk as well. So it's kind of, I enjoy all those genres, but I don't know, nothing really struck me on the album. I thought it was good, and I could see how it's ahead of the time. This is their debut album called The Graveyard and the Ballroom, and I can see how it's about ahead of the time. I think there was some interesting instrument playing on it and some interesting direction of the songs. But I don't know, there's a little bit of punk in there, so the songs are a little short, and I generally don't like 2-3 minute songs. If I was to choose, it's hard for them to develop in 2-3 minutes, and some of that is in there. I think there's 12 tracks on there, so it's kind of a lot of songs as well. So, but nothing really stuck out. But I do respect the album. I think it's a good album, but I don't think I'll ever go back to it, and I don't think I'll review another Certain Ratio album, because the album they actually have, it's the one Coming to America, which is Live in America, is sort of their live album, which I took a chance on 10-15 years ago when I bought it, and it's okay. It's okay, but maybe I'll try another one of their albums. If you guys recommend one of their albums or want to pay me to review it, maybe I'll review it. Number 11, Naked Eyes, 65 out of 100. Strong album, I think. I've had this for a while, but I don't listen to it a lot. And Promises of Promises has always been a highlight of the album for me. And but things have. I took a listen to it. It's been a while since I played it, and things kind of grew on me a little bit more. I really like Voices in My Head, When the Lights Go Out, Fortune and Fame. I think the B side is a little rough. It's kind of running out of ideas. Maybe a couple of bad inclusions on there. Not any great ballad track on here. Emotions in Motion is not really a good ballad track, and always something there to remind me is this really strong cover as well. So I think it's a good album. I think it could have been produced, maybe engineered a little bit better. There's some sounds that sort of stick out and don't really blend well in the mix, but overall an enjoyable synth pop album. 65 out of 100. And then what do we have in 10th place? This is the single for the album. I reviewed Microchip League's 1988 album called Code Numbers. I gave them a 66 out of 100. I think it's similar to Manufacture. And also even really And One, except And One's a little bit more EBM synth pop, but this is late 80s industrial album. It's got some good beats, it's got one track that's very different on it, and I really like that track as well. But for the most part, they're kind of in that industrial dance, and I think they're a little bit above average for that time. And I could say they're plus the main track, New York, is a slammer. I think it's a great track, a very underground, raw, catchy industrial track that fits 1988, 87 perfectly. But 66 out of 100. And then in 9th place, he said their album Take Care, which was their second and final album. I gave it a 67 out of 100. I went by the CD version of it. I went by the CD version of that because I wanted to include Suzanne and He Said, She Said. I think that's probably the more complete track list and the more thorough version of the album. I think it's got a good mix of dance beats, some sort of avant-garde sort of pop music and synth pop in there too. Along with Color Box, actually maybe even worse than Color Box. It's probably the worst, wouldn't say the worst, but worst album on this list as far as how it's recorded, and it almost sounds like there's a low pass filter going over the whole thing. You just can't hear any lows in there at all, like not much bass at all. But the songs themselves and his voice and everything like that, and the balance of a good couple slow songs as well, I think it's a pretty strong, well balanced record, and I gave it a 67 out of 100. Also, I gave it a 67 out of 100 Borgesia's Escorts and Models from 1989. I think it's also very of the time, but a solid industrial / EBM and maybe even a little bit of a touch of alternative rock in there. But it's a raw EBM album that I think is kind of challenging at the same time and kind of still ahead of the time, like Borgesia albums seem to always be a little bit ahead of the time when it comes to like EBM and stuff like that. But it's got a few highlights on it. A little short on content because I think there's only 8 songs if I remember correctly. But I gave it a 67 out of 100. In 7th place, Sedu Javu's 1990 album called Southern Lands. I gave it a 68 out of 100. It was on the higher side of good. Good synth pop album. It's got some really good songs on there. When I think of the opportunities of it, it seems like it's recorded over a few years period, maybe 87 to like 90. So some of the songs sound a little bit dated and similar, and then as the album evolves, it seems like it gets into even better songs, and maybe that's towards the release date, and it seems like they got better, and maybe they should have recorded the other ones again, because there's a big difference between the level of production on some of the earlier ones versus the other ones. But overall, it's got some catchy stuff. The lead singer's voice fits really good into it. It's kind of a lesser known, but verging on an underrated gem. It's verging right on it. It's got a couple really good songs, but a lot of good songs, and nothing's really subpar. Just a few sort of sound like the same, but nothing really. And then the production. Oh no, the production's fine on this one. So it's a good album. I got it on the high side of 68 out of 100. Bryan Ferry's 1993 album Taxi, I also gave it a 68. I think it's really well recorded, really well produced, some good choices of cover songs. You know, Bryan Ferry does a great job of making the tracks his own. I think the only really drawback is how high can you rate a cover album, right? There is also one kind of, you know, Amazing Grace on there. I don't know who wants to hear Bryan Ferry sing that song, but one thing I didn't say on the original video, and I'd like to say it now, is because I kind of knocked the song for being on there, but I forgot to mention his mother passed away a couple years before that, so maybe that's why he wrote the song. It is kind of a religious song, so I apologize for not taking that into account, and feeling like it's a more personal album. This is the first album since she passed away, and I have to respect. It's obviously not a horrible song in any way. It's just may not be the best choice for the rest of the album, but so I think it's a personal album, cover songs of his favorites. So I do kind of get the reason why he put it in there. So I respect that. I just wanted to say that because I didn't get a chance to mention that. Maybe that's the reason why I put it on there, because his mom passed away, and who knows what the feelings are with a song like that. It's got a lot of emotions tied to it, so I get it. It's just, I don't know if I want to hear a gospel song, necessarily by Bryan Ferry, but, it is what it is. Maybe it's not even really a gospel song. It's maybe even more so like a like a hymn or something like that, right? Sure, but it is what it is. But I think overall, if you like Bryan Ferry albums, it seems to be the one that people pass over a lot. And if you like Mamuna, you really need to check out Taxi, because I almost kind of consider them brother and sister albums, because the production, the musicians on there, producers, everything else is the same. Even the artwork is very kind of similarly black and red as well. So good album though, 68 out of 100. Now my top 5 for the last couple weeks. In fifth place is DAF with Alles ist gut. I gave it a 71 out of 100. I think it's a groundbreaking album in many ways. 1981 this came out. It's a raw EBM industrial album, kind of trying a few different things, very German sounding. Got some really cool electronics on there. It's got some catchy stuff as well. If I would rate the songs, I'd probably say it's somewhere in the overall, it's in the good range, but considering the electronics on here, how ahead of its time it is, how well it's produced, and just the rawness of it in a good way, I gave it some extra points, and so I consider it on the low side of a very good album. So it's 71 out of 100. In fourth place was Erasure Circus. This album brings back a lot of memories. I bought this when it came out. This is actually Two Ring Circus, which is actually the album that I ended up reviewing, because like one of the reviewers pointed out, I forgot to review Sexuality on here, which is the original track list of Circus. So I should change the name to Two Ring Circus. But the album itself, like, it has so many good songs, so many. There's a rawness on here. It's not well, sometimes I almost think Yazoo's albums were better produced than this album, or Wonderland, but I think as Innocence went on and Chorus, like, the mastering got better, the engineering got better. Like these are very raw tracks, and it's because of the equipment that's used. There's some raw Oberheims in here, and some of the beat machines and stuff. I don't know all that was used, but I can tell that it's a very raw album. It's kind of that period of analog and digital kind of melding, 90, 85, 86, and you're sort of going into the later 80s from keyboards. More maybe more less unique electronics, if I could say. Some of the Yamahas and stuff like that, and Casios, maybe not as deeper a personality or deeper sounds than are on old Rolands and stuff like that, and Moogs and stuff like that. That's why those pieces of gear are so desired, because they put out such good sounds. Yamaha DX7, probably some of their stuff that's sort of used around this time. Maybe not as depth. Doesn't have as much depth in some of the coloring and the frequencies and some of this period Erasure tracks. But the songs themselves, I think, are above par for any Erasure album. Sometimes is great. I really like Hideaway. I really like Leave Me to Bleed. Of course, The Circus. It Doesn't Have to Be, If I Could. So it's got some really good songs on here, and it's a very consistent album. There isn't really any song, except for Sexuality, if I would have reviewed the actual regular Circus, that I would have had under 2 stars. But yeah, I gave it a 72 out of 100. And then in second place is Heavenly Bodies, Celestial from 1988. I gave it a 73 out of 100. I think it's a strong shoegaze meets post-punk in a great way. If you like Cocteau Twins, if you like Dead Can Dance, this is like a no-brainer. You have to check it out. And then the last two, I thought I grabbed it, but I guess I didn't. So tied for first place with a 78 out of 100 for the last 2 weeks. The first one is Chris and Cozy's Heartbeat. So 78 out of 100, I gave this on the high side of very good. Talk about groundbreaking. Like, this is groundbreaking. This is very avant-garde, early electronics. There's a little bit of industrial in here as well. Just a very strong album. All kinds of different electronics sort of styles on here, including like electro and some early techno in here, and some sampling in here, and some really unique instruments used creatively on here. And it's got some good songs to boot, and it's dark and very raw electronics, and all the best things about experimental electronic. This is a great example of it. And then also tied with a 78 out of 100 for first place is Dead Can Dance debut album, which I did get the CD from when doing the review a few weeks ago till today. I did get I did pick up a copy of the CD because I do like it a lot and wanted to pick it up. Also because it's the version that has their first single on it, which has the 4-track, their first EP on 4AD Records. I can't remember the name, but it has my favorite Dead Can Dance song of that period of the album and the single. It has my favorite song from Dead Can Dance. I'm blanking on the name of it because I just found it, and so I was like, oh well, I like the original album, and now I like the single. Let me knock 2 birds out with 1 stone and get both of them on one release. So I got the CD of that, and that was probably my best album, my most favorite album. This one's, I'd probably say Dead Can Dance is a little bit better than this if I was to compare them. A little bit more enjoyable. And that was my best review, my most favorite review of the last couple weeks. So I'm coming into finishing my next couple reviews, the rest of my New Age reviews actually, and then I'll get into some more reviews, related to bands that are on this list and ones you've seen before, and kind of fine tune the rest of the 70s, 80s, and early 90s. And as I sort of prepare to kind of probably towards the end of the year get into the more mid 90s and you know, probably start delving into a little bit more other genres as well. But hopefully it'll be along for the ride. If you have any comments, definitely please leave them. Can always improve the channel. All right, thanks so much.